An asteroid core is on a collision course with Tessin 3. Alexander likes to go to the holodeck to fight his alien monsters. And Loxana Troy got Petrokian sausage when all she wanted was tea. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we are doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5, Episode 20. This one is entitled The Cost of Living, written by Peter Allen Fields, directed by Weinrich Colby. This was April 18th, 1992. Where were you? We've got a very special guest today, everybody. This is going to be a fun one. It's going to be a deep dive. Our special guest today, can you guess? Can you guess? It's Chris Halstead. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's beautiful weather and a nice day to talk about something that happened a long time ago, but it was a fun experience.
I hope you remember it well.
I hope you remember. It was a long time ago.
It was.
I guess what do you remember about it?
Well, it was actually a really unusual shoot. It was the fourth day of probably the heaviest rains that LA had had in 25 years.
Really?
And the Paramount lot was flooded. It's an easy day to remember. You couldn't get in the lot off of Melrose. There's 2 feet of water everywhere. And
so this mud bath was actually in the parking lot.
You know what? They built that all up elevated because everywhere else, there were times walking around, you were walking through the decks, hallways of the Enterprise, and there was 3 inches of water everywhere. There were rivers running in the sets of the ship. They had apple boxes and sandbags. Remember sandbags holding up cabling? And I remember coming around one corner and looking down a hallway and seeing kind of this river of water floating on a starship and thinking, well, that isn't good. That or in outer space, that is just such not a good thing.
Wow. They were going through a real life Star Trek episode while they're filming a Star Trek episode.
Yeah, and I remember arriving, and I was going in, and Marina and John Franks were heading out, and you could tell it was a rough set. In that rough getting on there, rough, tough, and I think they had done all their filming and were heading out, and you got the feeling you get there sometimes when the set's really congested and rushing that the rain had put them behind, and it did a lot. And this episode gets comments a lot of times that people say, well, it's a little disjointed, or we ended up on a long shot there or whatever, and Jump seemed to cut this, and they were cutting a number of scenes as they were running out of time.
Wow.
Because we're flooding, and when Winrich, I think he was the director. He did things like McCloud and Movies of the Week and kind of standard stuff. Big establishing shot, tight shot, 2 shots, the close up, kind of by the book. And when you're running behind on time, to buy the book, all the tight shots go. You just stick to your 2s and the wider shots, and you can see that on this episode. If you think you're usually you get tighter and tighter as you go in and back and forth, and you'll end up all these scenes where you're kind of on 2 shot with someone in the background, and then you cut to the next one and you think they were pushing it, and it says a lot for him that he was able to get this whole thing shot as the set was flooding.
He's a pro.
Yeah, and then you can tell it was a tough day for that. I came on my character. There was a whole dialogue scene. I guess the role was first learner, but they called our group the Bickersons because our group just argued a lot. Very pleasant thing. Yeah. But that scene was supposed to film first, and they said, no, we're running late. We're just going to go right to the holodeck. And we did the mud bath in the holodeck. And I think originally all of us were supposed to be in the mud bath a great deal, but they hadn't done the previous stuff. And they didn't want to get the costumes all muddy. So they just passed out. And then they were running so far behind on things. They said, you know what, we're cutting this section here. And that happened to a number of characters and scenes, I understand.
Christopher, actually, before we get too deep into all of this, because there's a lot going on here and it's all very interesting. But before we go into that too deeply, I want to get a little bit of background on you, because you told us something right before we recorded to let people know, who you are and where you come from. You were originally up for the role of
Chakotay at one
Were
point.
you already a Star Trek fan? Did you know anything about Star Trek?
Yeah, I had. My dad was in rocket design. He worked on the Redstones and Friendship 7 programs. So in Enterprise, when those rockets are going up, I always go, that's one of my dad's projects. I had a big Friendship 7 logo above my crib when I was born.
Wow.
Which we'd watch the original series together because Laughing came on and then Star Trek after that. And if you didn't bug my dad, he would let you watch it. But he would always shut it off. Commercials, he would turn toward you and say, "Okay, did you see what that phaser did? They fired it and it went slow. Let's talk about general relativity right now because that shouldn't happen." And he would lecture about the physics of what was going on. Things would bug him. But that was the kind of the way we bonded. And then I was a chemical engineer in college and into the first 3 years. I always liked science and always a big Trekkie. And then this was Cost of Living was my first time on the Star Trek set.
And what was it like auditioning for Chakotay real quick? Because that definitely piqued my interest there.
Well, it was very fair. Junie Lowry Johnson was great. And I had worked with her. I played the Jem'Hadar first for What You Leave Behind, earlier number of
last
things.
episode of Deep Space Nine, yeah.
Yeah, last couple, yeah. And she called me in, and I have a great grandmother, Rosa Zapata, off the reservation in Arizona, and which put me in the running for this. But they had a lot of.
So the Native American background was a big thing for them.
Was a necessity. And I've done a lot of, I stunt ride. I grew up riding trick riding on horses, and I've stunt ridden for a lot of Native Americans. And there's some very kind of strict rules in Nosotros, the Mexican American, Latina group of what you should be genetically past ancestors and stuff to work. And Star Trek was very, very upfront about that. And although I have time I've spent on the reservation, and I have a mixed growing up in very different cultures, I tried to be really upfront on that. And I was glad because understanding how they wanted to swing this and how they were going to very, very strict influences, I think I recommended them that it could be a difficult thing. And I think it was. I think the concept of some of the Maquis was a difficult thing for Star Trek. But I think it was my third audition that I didn't get a call back on. It's the first time we went to producers. And those things that happened that could have gone one way or the other. I still enjoyed watching all the series very, very much.
Third audition's pretty good, though. You got pretty far.
I did. It was good. It was good. First time I came in, I do a lot of work up into high school. I had really long hair. When I finally, my folks said, time to cut that off and whatever. So I had it saved. And my agent said, you know what? At least show them what you do. Because most of the pictures you have were culturally, I say antique styling. What was 1890s, 1880s for most of the horse work. And they said, for a futuristic thing, go ahead, show them what you have, but really try to listen to what they want, which was really out of the ordinary. If you think about it, we're talking about a futuristic Native American. How do you tie those together? And I'm not sure they exactly knew themselves, but they were very intent to try to make it work. And I wish them well, because that's still a difficult thing to do in mainstream America.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I can see a lot of the things, the elements of, who they actually ended up going with for Chakotay. I can see some of those traits in you, and you have a very signature voice as well. Your voice, I was going to ask if you've ever done radio or voiceover work, because it's so easy to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
If I stop drinking water for a few days, it all gets like this, and then it all.
Well, don't stop drinking water.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so we sidetracked you a bit from talking about this episode, but now I just wanted to make sure everybody knew kind of, who you are, what you do. But let's dive into this episode. I remember seeing it a couple times before. This is Sirach's first time seeing it, and I remember the first thing I thought was, oh, It's the mud bath episode. So let's take a deep dive, pun intended, into the mud baths. How did that? Was there an interview process? What, or can you tell us about like the makeup and the wardrobe, because it was nominated for 2 Emmys, for one for makeup, one for wardrobe, and you're one of the people in makeup and wardrobe. Can you tell us about any of that?
And the wardrobe that I wore, which was this wonderfully intense lavender orange, skin tight, revealing everything in the world. They said, you know, come in a unitard, and I happy for that. And I guess the word, it's in some Star Trek museum now. Someone sent me a picture. It's like, oh, it's your outfit in a museum somewhere.
What?
I've got it somewhere. It's very dramatically lit and everything. But yeah, they went out, and I know that originally tied in during the bickering. They asked if I could juggle, which I could, which is what I came in on, but they didn't end up filming that scene. They ended up using the same outfit in a different episode later on. He's a world juggler. So they since they didn't film it for the cost of living, they used that for a different episode. I couldn't offhand say what it was, but
they did have a world juggler in this episode, but it might have been a different kind of situation. And by the way, I need to correct myself. It wasn't 2 Emmy nominations; it was 2 Emmy wins for this episode. So sorry, please continue.
It was an interesting episode in that there are, you know, Star Trek, especially TNG, can be, you know, high-minded stories of moral guidance and intergalactic turpitude and what is the question of right and wrong. And I'm not really sure that this episode is that one. This is, and you think about it, I mean, this is Majel Barrett having lost her husband just a few months earlier.
Right.
And I did get to watch her deliver her her speech on loneliness in this, which I think is a highlight of it. I happen to like that speech very much. And it really dealt with what Alexander was going through. So it was not science fiction, high and mighty, let's solve the great problems of the world. This was kind of intimate characters, what characters are going through. And you know, Lwaxana Troy, love her or hate her, she's an incredible character. You don't have many of those written in the world. And very much like you mentioned, you know, at the mud bath, you come into the mud bath and there was the whole group already in the bath. And it was great because Majel Barrett was kind of holding court. She was talking away and she was delightful. And everyone was having kind of a rough afternoon. And I remember her comment. She said, I love this mud. It'll be great for my skin. I'll look just like number 1.
Oh, and cool.
Which was a great line. You know, it just, you know, and someone said, number 1, what's that? One of the other characters. And she said, she was kind of this pause and she went, it's another character I played. And to which the other person said, oh, you've been on this show before, which was just great kind of silence. And just in classic Majel Barrett, she said, yeah, a couple times. She goes, they keep me around, which was just you just want to go, what class?
Yeah. Well, if you stay in that mud long enough, you're going to look like a number 2 more than that.
Hey, Rock Lofton, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. She said, yeah, they keep me around. And besides that number 1, then she goes, it was just a pilot, which was just great, which was was perfect when you realize that was their pilot for the show that she played that character. So yeah.
What was her demeanor, though? You said she was holding court. So was she... she wasn't as down as everyone else was with the weather and whatnot and the circumstances. You kind of are depicting her in a more uplifting, positive way.
Positive way. She was upbeat. She was sitting in the center and enjoying making the most of everything. And she made it very pleasant. talking to everyone and asking people questions and keeping the attitude up. And I remember she had a cup. They didn't get the cup dirty. They didn't want the lines to go above certain levels. That's why they didn't put us in the mud as well, because they had to clean costumes later on if they were going to reuse them. But so a lot of technical stuff when you're dealing with a 3-foot deep mud bath. And she was a professional the whole time. She kept things just talking away. And of course, she had been for that group. It was the group coming on the set there, but she had been there for days. So for someone who could have been had enough with all the rain and the flooding and stuff, she kept things upbeat and was absolutely marvelous. It was neat.
Wow.
And I wonder about the mud as well, because usually when you're in between takes and they're saying, okay, we're going to get this shot, you've got to dip yourself into that mud into the height level that the camera wants, and then we've got to get multiple takes going, right? Because we're going to try to get a printable take, and then at some point we are going to change the camera angle for different coverage,
which could take forever.
Are we staying in the mud, or are we coming out and getting
staying in the mud? Staying in the mud the whole time. It was hours sitting in the mud. Yeah. And it was one of the you think to a writer, just right. They are in a mud bath. It's just a simple.
Yeah.
But there is a lot involved in that.
That's like 4 hours in the mud. That's not. It's not like 30, 15, maybe 20 minutes. That's hours. I mean, it could potentially be.
You've just made something very difficult, and it's not like a scene where you can walk around and shake out, and you are stuck in the mud. Yeah.
I was also thinking about bathroom break. At some point, I mean, I would be like, are they just using outhouses because they don't want to take mud with them, inside, or what's going on there? Don't need an answer for that. It was just, and I was also thinking about the blocking initially, how do they know the height for Alexander? When you said 3 foot deep, I was thinking they probably had the stand-in sitting in there before they added the mud, it would seem, so that they could get the right apple box for Alexander to sit on, the right levels possibly. And then they go, okay, here's our line. I was just trying to figure that out. I don't think you were there for any of that, but did you get any impression of logistically how they kind of worked all that out?
Well, I know that the whole scene was elevated, although it might look as if it's a mud bath in the floor. It was, everything was built 3 or 4 feet off the surface of the studio set. So it probably made it fairly easier for the cameras to be right at that level where they wanted. I'm sure if they hadn't used all the apple boxes in the hallways to have people think a place to walk on in the rain, the spare ones were probably underneath them to get to be just the right height in that mud, which was very exact. And they didn't want a lot of, the old thing of you have a drinking glass with a certain amount of liquid and please don't make it go up and down.
Yeah.
It's like, please don't dip arms and limbs into the mud. Please, keep that straight. We have to shoot through this.
This poor guy's had to sit like this the whole time. I noticed that too.
There were a lot of arms up on the kind of the benches around this thing. I don't want to put them down here. Yeah. Or don't rub your face or things like that.
Oh my God, this is a mud disaster. I do have a question, because this episode won the Emmys for makeup and wardrobe, and I wanted to ask you about your experience working with, the legendary Bob Blackman and also Mike Westmore.
Both Bob and Mike were there when I was the Jem'Hadar first, because I remember them. They had a great talk on. They were like, you know what? Let's give them a bunch of forehead stuff. Where's our box of forehead stuff? Don't think they used the word stuff, but they ended up bringing a big box of former Jem'Hadar horn spike thing pieces, and they went bigger all in here on all the crusting. And they were like, yeah, I think that's good. And it was a very kind of enjoyable, they were both in there working. It was a more developed makeup than usually was done for the Jemadar. They said it was the last big episode thing. And if you look, there is a trading card for some game. One of my younger sons gave me as a birthday present, and the Jem'Hadar pictured is my character.
Wow, really?
Kind of fun. It's like, thanks, that's a good one. And then there's a big book on all the Star Trek characters listing, and I just think it's because they used that Jem'Hadar first because they did a good job of really doing all the detail and crest work on it.
Right.
So it was fun. I mean, other than you're talking like this, all the difference was all the cresting. So I think that's why
nailed it. So before you did that role of Jem'Hadar, you didn't drink water for a few days, I guess.
I want to ask you because I can't help but notice it. Captain Picard, if I'm not mistaken, he keeps a model ship somewhere in his office or quarters, and I see you've got some model ships behind you. So I wanted to get into a little bit about your experience, teaching, tall ship sailing, as you called it.
Yeah, I've always sailed. I had an uncle who introduced. I think I was 6 or 7, and he had a little wooden boat, called a flatty, a flat bottom that you could go along beaches. And I fixed it all up, and I re-rigged it from a simple sloop into a big top square sail cutter. All sorts of extra sails I put on it.
God, I'm already lost. This is such a science.
And I loved it. I always loved sailing wooden ships. And I would go out up in the Oregon area, sail on the rivers and across lakes. And I loved star lore. And I am fascinated with the fact that you can look up at the sky and see where you are. Mm-hmm. And I teach navigation at the Los Angeles Maritime Institute. And I can teach. Nowadays, everything can be handled with GPS and a sextant if you need it, and simple work. But I love what I call it navigation without numbers for school kids. Although I work it into the world of trig, they just don't know that in the very beginning. But to teach kids when you're voyaging that you can be on a boat, and whether it's daytime with sun angles, water swells, water refraction angles, or at nighttime, what I call the vault of the heavens, where you can spot, everyone knows, say the North Star, but what are the other stars doing and how are they rotating over? And if you understand how that happens, you can be in the middle of the ocean with no land, and you know your directions. And it's a marvelous thing to teach someone, because it gives you a sense of how you fit on this planet and in the solar system and in the universe in general, which is an awe-inspiring thing. And the fact that through thousands of years, sailors and navigators have figured out how to use things, whether it's something as simple as a compass or it's a Viking sunstone, a Zonstein, and it's Icelandic feldspar. And for the longest time, we'd read about these things in the Nordic sagas, and we didn't quite know what they were. And then a couple of them were found in the wreck of the Mary Rose when it sunk during the reign of Henry VIII. And it's a birefractic crystal. So I don't think the camera will show, but if I show here, so I put a single dot, it's a little bit of pine tar on the side. But if I hold it up here, you'll see 2 dots.
Oh yeah.
So it splits light into 2 at 90 degrees. And what that means is I can go out on a cloudy day in the morning, and I can, especially if I wrap it in leather, keep it here and wrap it, bring it up, and look, as I go to one side of the sun, the inner dot gets darker and the further one outside gets lighter. And I can go and I go, there's my sun right there. Boom, there's east. And that there are these techniques that people learned to be able to navigate, and usually with different devices, different things that culture has developed, and oftentimes languages and symbols, which is one reason I love Star Trek, because Deep Space Nine, especially when we're dealing with Bajoran culture and an archaic throwback, whether it's various stones or things from the temples, that cultures develop these things to explain their culture. And in terms of navigation, that's where it is. That's what happened. That is, every culture has developed stories to explain how to get from one place to the other. Oftentimes, they simply become stories, and people forget that it's a story to navigate by. And oftentimes, by explaining figuring out what the original story is, it opens your eyes. Oh, that's how you use this particular device, or how you get from here to there, which sometimes is a very difficult thing. But cultural navigation, whether it's Polynesian sailors heading across using star triangulation, or Odysseus trying to get home to Ithaca, is told.
This reminds me a lot of my favorite Deep Space Nine episode, Explorers, because Sirach and Avery, they basically did that. They read about this lore, these stories, and they said, "Can we do this? Can we replicate?" And this is kind of what you're talking about here. That's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And that is one of my favorite episodes, because the bonding that occurs in that episode, and the fact that you rediscover something that was lost, and that feeling of being tied into something bigger. That is what, to me, on an old wooden ship, is what it's all about. I love that episode. Without doubt, that is my favorite Deep Space Nine episode, Explorers.
Yeah, and also to tie in a little bit more what you were saying, just to put a bow tie, that artifact that you just showed us, this Viking artifact, that basically is used to separate light. Somebody had to find out and discover that was the case, that this piece of stone, this crystal, has that ability to break the light that way, and then to use that particular thing as something to help navigate. So all of that talks about problem solving and ingenuity, which is another theme that you see in Star Trek. How do we solve this problem in front of us? And in a simple case of just figuring out how to reflect light and refract light, you're able to problem solve and say, oh, this is how we can do it. And I just think it just speaks to how throughout time, whether it's the inventions of all of these different ideas and principles of gravity and mathematics, and how we've advanced ourselves, we've always gone back to these simple ways of discovering, problem solving tools to get past whatever hurdle we have at that immediate time.
You can figure it out, and then someone finds a way to display it, to teach it to someone else.
And again, to speak to you, the rediscovering of that, I might find that little piece of crystal and not know that that's what it's for, but to rediscover that is the purpose behind it, gives a whole nother meaning to the generation that has that knowledge, that understands the history of that artifact. To also speak to your point about rediscovering Bajoran artifacts.
Mm-hmm. You say you because you mentioned that we bring a lot of old tools on our ships with us, and kids work with them, and they work sometimes for a week with things. And there was one that found it was a stone like this, and they found it has a refraction index that's different from the side, and they were showing that you could see the refraction index on the water, which is the Polynesians would use that refraction index as well. And suddenly we found out that one of these, and it would, if you on the side of the stone, that little cross line, we started putting those on there because it shows from the horizon where the refraction index is. And it was a 9-year-old kid who showed us that, just because working with these for for 4 days. And he went, what's the rainbow thing that keeps showing up there? And you're like, so it's bringing it out there, getting it out there, and experiencing it. And when you do, suddenly you notice something different.
That is just absolutely fascinating. Wow. Christopher, thank you so much for hanging out with us. By the way, the Los Angeles Maritime Institute is in San Pedro, California, right at the southern tip of LA, basically in between Palos Verdes and Long Beach. So definitely, everybody, I'm practically signing up right now just hearing you talk. Everybody, you got to go. If you're in the area, definitely this sounds like it's something. Do you do any online courses?
Yes, we do. We have, well, most of it's for school. We started it all during COVID when we went online. We have every month there are crew volunteer trainings. There's one this Saturday where in the beginning you learn how to coil lines, you learn how to climb masts, you learn calls and response, and then we have navigation, engine rebuilding, sail repair. By the end, if you went through a full course, you could finish. We have options with the Port of Los Angeles. It was a great big freighter that came in about 3 months ago, and someone with a bullhorn on the catwalk yelled, "Ahoy! Actually, returning from Singapore, Maritime Institute, class of '97." And it was someone who now is a mate on a boat and travels and sails around the world. So it's a wonderful experience. Doesn't cost you anything, and you can go sailing anytime you want.
That's incredible.
So,
all right. Well, everybody at home, check it out. Los Angeles Maritime Institute. Christopher Halstead, thank you so much for hanging out with us. This has been awesome. So glad you made it for us. Really appreciate it. Everybody, stick around. We've got way more to review on this episode. We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule.